Just before I clean down Chewy after the anti-rust primer, I'm going to put some paint on the inside of my wings, and I'm just going to use some rattle cans for that.
I primed these with an anti-rust zinc primer when I was doing areas on the car in the last video. There's very little signs of exposure on these panels from the car's near 30-year history on the road, so I don't think it needs anything stronger than this gloss black. I blew off any dust or overspray in the garage and then degreased the entire shell. Got my filler out, cut up a section of cardboard to use as a mixing board. Check the instructions to remember whether this is the one that's a golf ball to a pea or 3 peas. It's 1 pea. Gives you the proportions of filler to hardener. I'm just going to mix small batches, so as said, around the size of a golf ball, and then 1 pea of hardener. Small batches, then you don't end up with too much, and it's not so difficult to mix up a little bit at a time. It means you're under less pressure to use it up before it goes off as well. I have metal welded in here, but it's just to give it a smoother appearance. This was the area that was quite rough at the top of the 2 back doors from rust that gathered along the rubber strip. This is my new Jefferson Tools palm sander from eFox Engineers, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this works on the car. I bought a big batch of sanding discs from a bodywork specialist. So I'm just fitting the adapter to fit my supermarket airline. Bit of plumbing tape on that to seal it. And now some air tool oil. Don't have a feed on mine, so I just will top it up in the feed each day that I use it. Well, this shows the limitations of my non-professional compressor. So I'm not going to be able to use my air feed mask at the same time as using the sander. But I can see that the dust is fairly concentrated and drops down away from the tool. So keeping sessions in the garage relatively short and the place ventilated, I should be okay with the basic dust mask. As my confidence increased with the new tool, I expanded away from just the damaged areas onto the entire surface area of the car. I'm using a 400 grit sanding disc. I fitted up my wings with the underside painted. That's just to support them while I do a bit of refinishing on them. They're pretty scratched. You can see one's the wrong colour and a little bit of a dent on the other one. I was delighted to remember where I put the screws 3 years ago. So just tighten them up with a few of the original fixings. And then I decided to jack the car up and get it a bit higher so I could work at the bases of the doors. and these little bits on the sills. Still cleaning off some of that adhesive protection in the lower corners. One more bit of the rub strip adhesive. Took off the wheels so I can get at the lip of the arches. There's a little bit of surface rust on these. So I started smoothing down the surface just like I did on the rest of the car, and these deglazed areas, it was interesting to see what it would do here, and I was very pleased. It sanded down the loose edges and blended them in really nicely. I've been around the car by now and finishing up on the other wing, which had a lot of scratches, and again it just blended them away really nice. I discovered a big area of filler underneath where that rub strip had been fitted in a rather untidy way. I washed down the car so I could kind of see where I stood. There's so much dust, it was hard to see the wood from the trees. Then I went around and marked out a few little dents that I want to fill. This is one of the bigger ones on the front wing. Starting in the center with these and spreading out the filler. I carried on around the car with a couple of more batches and flattened out all these little dents. I found my old square electric sander was best for getting in at the inner lip of the rear window surround, and also for these door tops. I even got into a bit of sculpting with the angle grinder. Down to some primitive hand sanding there. So I used a 120 grit to quickly reduce the filler. I went around on all the sections I'd done and got it roughly down to shape. And then went over it with the 400 grit. Now, there are two little washer jets on the bonnet that I needed to remove before I could tackle that. I had been a little hesitant about going at the bonnet until I had a bit of experience with the sander, but it was the last panel left, so finally it was time to have a go. And I needn't have worried. The sander is predictable to use. I soon went onto this area that was delaminated like the top of that wing. Bonnet from a different car, but weathered in the same way in the same area. Interesting. And again, very pleased how it cleaned up these areas. The sander really took the labour out of doing a big panel like this. I cleaned off all the dust and washed it down again. I'll take a break here, which will allow me to do a little bit more touching up before starting fresh into the spray painting.
So that's most of my paint prep done. I'm going to spray it in sections, and I'm going to do the doors first. So I'll probably do a few other little bits and pieces to the bonnet as I get closer to painting that, and also bits like the sills and the slam panels. But that's the majority of that done, and I must say I'm very pleased with what the air sander was able to do, especially on the bonnet with those deglaze sections. So I'm really looking forward now to, I'll do a bit of rust priming now on some other bits of bare metal that I've exposed, and then I will get to the proper finishing primer and top coats.